marriage is on the decline in much of the Western world, right? For example, in New Zealand, 2025 had the lowest annual figure of couples getting married since 1953. A lot of people are saying, actually, that idea of what I should want is not actually lining up with who I am or what my life I want it to look like.
So, what if I told you that you never again had to put up with what you don't like in relationships? So, all the parts of relationships that don't feel comfortable or right to you, just get rid of them. And all the parts that you like and you wish you had more of, let's invite those in. So, imagine a relationship custom built for your life, just around what makes you happy, even if it's not what you've been told to want. So that's what's waiting for you in today's interview. We're going to be challenging the myth that every relationship should look the same. And if you are a woman in midlife who has done the traditional relationship and you know you never want to go through that again, this is going to show you what's possible. Welcome. I'm your host, Amy Waterman, and today I am with my good friend, relationship coach, and registered celebrant, Janel Atlas. Janelle helps people bring more honesty, clarity, and vitality into their relationships with themselves, their partners, and their lives. Welcome, Janelle.
Hey, Amy, it's so great to see you and have this conversation. I'm really privileged and happy to be here.
I want to start out with the big question. Why are traditional relationships failing so many of us, particularly us women in midlife?
Well, I'm not sure whether I would say across the board that traditional relationships are failing for everyone. I'm sure there are people for whom they're quite contented and happy. But I can say anecdotally, as a woman in my mid 40s, I do see lots of people who feel disenchanted with the story that we've been told, the myth, the legend, the ideal of finding the one to commit to for life. And, there are books and podcasts and YouTube channels completely committed to parsing out this question. Why have marriages worked a certain way and now we're saying no? And some of the reasons people point to are that, longer life expectancy. When traditional marriage entered the scene, we maybe were really stuck into much shorter lifespans and we didn't have as many options. Another is that we have significantly higher expectations now in the 20th and 21st century of what marriage should provide for us, what needs it should meet. But I would say that midlife is often a phase where women in particular who've raised their children to adolescence or adulthood, or they're carrying those dual duties of demanding careers along with the default roles of household management, emotional caretaking for children, elderly parents, they pick their heads up and go, oh, I'm deeply unhappy. This actually isn't working for me. There is a commonly cited figure that about 70% of divorces in heterosexual couples over 40 are initiated by the woman, and that single women are happier than single men later in life. And I think a lot of women would say, that doesn't surprise me that much. But what I do see up close in working with my coaching clients is that lots of men are also feeling failed by traditional relationships as well. Younger generations are more likely than previous generations to see relationships as something to be designed or negotiated on a case-by-case basis. And also, I need to acknowledge that marriage is on the decline in much of the Western world, right? For example, in New Zealand, 2025 had the lowest annual figure of couples getting married since 1953, with the general marriage rate dropping from 15.5 people per 1,000 eligible down to 7.6 per thousand. So it's, a lot of people are saying, actually, that idea of what I should want is not actually lining up with who I am or what my life I want it to look like.
And I think part of it is the switch towards a more individualistic society as well. We tend to feel that a relationship should make our life better than if we were just alone and being single. And so we have something to compare it to. If I'm not happy, if this is making me smaller, if this is constraining me, then is it a choice I want to make? But the problem is, of course, when we say, this isn't making me happy, this isn't what I want my life to be like, we don't know what options are out there because so many of us, especially us older women, we just had that one size fits all model. And there's a name, I only learned this later in life. There's a name for that one size fits all model called the relationship escalator. Tell us what the relationship escalator is.
So I define the relationship escalator as that seemingly standard trajectory that many relationships have been expected to take. From casual dating, you meet someone, you maybe start casually dating, then you have the conversation about exclusivity, then at some point you commit, maybe move in together, get married, go through a civil union, you join your finances to some degree, sharing social circles, you integrate your lives in a really kind of extensive sense. And there is this kind of unquestioned inevitability to this image of relationships as being something you get on and you go up and up and up, and that a relationship that doesn't do that is illogical, or that it isn't solid, or that perhaps the relationship is in question. Now, I do want to say, if that's what people want, and that's a conscious choice, we can talk more about that. I love that for people. There are people for whom, yes, those are the steps I want to take. But I do think there are other options. The other thing I want to point out that's interesting about the relationship escalator is that we all know at any point you can jump off. But that usually means dissolution of the relationship and starting again at the bottom with someone else. Now, that sounds kind of tiring to me, and this is predicated on the idea that being in a committed partnership always looks the same, and that those who don't do that are somehow suspect or not really committed. But I don't believe that that is necessarily the most useful framework for thinking about the shape of a relationship. What if it's not about going up, but it's about creating space for the life that you want to have? I'm very suspicious of anything that is culturally prescribed that purports to be natural or the way things have always been done.
So, right now, I'm thinking about when a woman is in a relationship and it's not going up on the escalator, she feels like he doesn't love her enough.
Mm.
So they are dating, but maybe they haven't moved in together. Well, clearly, the only thing holding him back must be that he doesn't love her. They are living together, but they're not married. Clearly, he must not love her enough to marry her. So we have this sense that unless we're progressing up to the top, the reason is the lack of love, which is devastating. So I'm just curious, why would someone want to stay on a certain place in the relationship escalator and not move up if it isn't because of lack of love?
It's such a great question. And I think I really do believe that what matters most, our actions matter and our intention matters. So there are times where a woman might be with a man and she does feel like, I really want that level of commitment. I really want to live together. I want to have coffee together in the morning. I want to get a dog, or I want to have children, or I want to go to special events together at our workplaces and with friends. And if the man doesn't want that, what I often say to my clients is, both of you are fully valid in what it is that you want, but it might be a misalignment, right? So neither of you are right or wrong in what you want. You are perfectly justified and you deserve to have what you want. And that might mean that this relationship isn't the one where you're going to have that need met. And so you need to decide, is that need important enough that you are willing to compromise in some other spaces because you are getting so much of your needs met here? Or are you looking at it saying, no, this is vital to me, and out of self-respect, I'm not going to abandon myself and become resentful of this person who isn't giving me this thing that they've said I don't want to do. So I do think that the relationship escalator as a concept, it really denies or neglects the context specific considerations that make it inaccessible or undesirable to some people. So, for example, if financial considerations such as home ownership might play a part in a person's desire to cohabitate. If you're 45, 50, 60 years old and you happily own your home, I know many women who say, I'd rather he live next door. That would be really nice. And if you can afford that, that is no less valid of an option than, oh, we have to move in together because we need to be in each other's pocket all the time, right? Or, for example, a person who is polyamorous, who has multiple committed partnerships, they may not be interested or available for a traditional marriage. They might already be married. Does that mean that that person isn't available to love you in some really beautiful ways that might meet some needs. Now, I also want to we talked about how marriage is failing. You know, traditional partnership can fail a lot of women. Also want to kind of point out that at this day and age, people are having more sexual and romantic partners over the course of their lifetime. And the country where I live is third in the world in terms of number of average lifetime sexual partners. And it's 13.2, which means serial monogamy a lot of the time. But that doesn't necessarily hold up with the relationship escalator. So I think a lot of people are looking at this saying, this is the bill I've been sold. This is the script I've been handed. And maybe that's great. And I do want that. And I need to find someone who also wants that. Or maybe I could think more flexibly about the bits and pieces, you know, as a relationship smorgasbord instead of a relationship escalator.
So I want to talk about that smorgasbord because for most of us, the relationship escalator is all we know, that you go to stage one and stage two and stage three. Let's say that we've got a couple who is not aligned with what they want next. So maybe they're supposed to move in together and they're just not sure that that's the right step. Talk about how this couple then can explore their other options that aren't necessarily moving up to that next level, but that how they can make it work with what they actually their own unique needs and wants.
It's such a good question because the questions that we ask really open up other possibilities, right? So if the question is, why doesn't he want to move in with me? The logical answer is because he doesn't want to commit. He doesn't love me. He doesn't like me enough. I'm too difficult. I'm annoying. I'm too much. You know, all the stories that our minds go to, and they're just stories. So we need to be able to draw in the wisdom that we have from the other relationships we have in our life because people already have friends and we don't necessarily see those people in competition with each other, right? You can have multiple friends and you can have your favorite friend who goes shopping with you and your favorite friend who gives amazing advice and your friend you go on a yearly weekend getaway with and your friend who's your ride or die who you call at 3 a.m. when you have insomnia, right? Those friends are not in competition with each other. They each bring incredible value and meaning to your life. But when a single person comes to meet me for a coaching session, they often have a framework of that functional fixedness. Relationship means one specific thing. By holding love relationships as something wholly different from how they do the rest of life, they miss the skills that they've already cultivated and they already have on board because relationships are just agreed upon dynamics and roles that people take together. That's what a relationship is. So that means we can negotiate it. We can talk about it. We can ask the question, what is important to you in this relationship? How do you know you're loved? Here's what's here. I want to share with you. Here are the things that help me feel loved. And that might then lead down a track of saying, so I want to live together, right? And that requires courage. But it frees ourselves up to consider the proclivities and desires rather than just taking those societal expectations, because relationship options are just as varied as the people who are in them and are limited only by our imagination, time constraint, and money. I have found. So I do have a few terms that I use regularly in my coaching work and that I think many people, especially of my generation and older, are not maybe as up on. And my background, I have a PhD in writing and rhetoric. So I'm always interested in how the language we use, and I know you're a word nerd too, can help us imagine different possibilities. So I'm just going to throw a few out there and you all can kind of consider what might stick for you. So comet is a relationship with a person who lives in another location and who you see only infrequently, maybe 1 or 2 times a year, for somewhat short-term, intensive dating, sex, or connection. You may or may not be in a lot of contact between, like a comet that circles our solar system or our galaxy. We see it, it burns bright, it passes, it's on a predictable schedule, but it's not a regular part of the night sky. So that's one term that I really love. Most people know about friends with benefits. It's a very familiar term in popular parlance. A person who you hang out with and genuinely like in a friendly way, but you meet some of each other's sexual needs. And as long as that is done ethically and above board, that's a perfectly valid way to relate to someone. Queer platonic is a term that I really love, a deeply committed partnership that goes beyond a traditional friendship, but it is not romantic or sexual in nature. One of my closest friends, we are queer platonic partners. I know that when I need to haul, I need to rent a trailer and I need to haul mulch, they are there for me. We talk about our relationships. We are deeply, deeply committed to each other. It's a high level life commitment and prioritization of emotional intimacy, but that's maybe typically reserved for spouses. But we each have our own unique boundaries in that relationship. A growing trend is living together apart. We're living apart together. Committed partners who choose for any number of reasons to live in separate houses. This used to be seen as a big no-no, or even the mini version that my partner and I use, which is sleep divorce. I'm a terrible sleeper. I'm a sleepwalker, sleep talker, just absolute nightmare when I'm trying to sleep and he's trying to sleep. So we sleep in separate bedrooms. And this is a growing trend that many people don't acknowledge because it is seen as, oh, you're in trouble. That means something's wrong. No, it just means we're both better when we've slept, right? So finding ways that work for you. Relationship anarchy is a radical left position towards relationships that completely reject societal norms and instead designs every relationship entirely on mutual consent, communication, and the unique desires of the people who are involved. Ethically non-monogamous partnerships. This is people who are deeply committed to each other, but have made agreements outside of traditional monogamy, meaning there's space for them to see other people sexually, emotionally, or intimately with people other than their maybe anchor partner or nesting partner. Monogamish is one of my favorite terms. This was popularized by sex advice columnist Dan Savage to describe a mostly traditional, primarily monogamous relationship, emotionally committed and exclusive, but allows for occasional sexual or flirtation activity with other people, like making out or a one-off sexual encounter if you're out of town. And those terms can be decided by the people who are in that relationship. And then the last one I'm mentioning, which I think is, really growing in importance, is conscious monogamy. And this is the active choice, right? Getting on the escalator or stepping into something that from the outside might look traditional, but that it is not defaulted to by societal standards. And it involves deliberately defining who are we? Who are we to each other? What is important? What helps you feel loved? What is safety? What does loyalty look like to you? How do you know that I'm in your corner? And that this is really requires us to continue having ongoing discussions because we change, right? I heard a woman a few years ago on social media, and she was in her 80s, I think. And she said, I have had 10 marriages, 12 marriages, and it's all been with the same person because we change, right? And so we revisit the rules that we make at the beginning of a relationship are no longer, when they're no longer fruitful and beneficial for us, we get to change them. So I love conscious monogamy. I support my clients with polyamory, but also, people who are from the outside look traditionally monogamous, but are doing it with intention and care and a lot of love.
What I love about this is that all of these require conversations.
Mm,
And one thing I really notice a lot with the women who are struggling in their relationship is there is no conversations.
yes.
And if they want to be on the relationship escalator, they want to move up. He just refuses to talk about it. They don't move, they stay stuck. So what I'm seeing here is we have so many options, but to get to any of these options, we have to talk about it.
Mm.
So there's two questions I want to ask. The first is how do you bring up that conversation? And the second thing is what do you do if you're with a partner who has a hard time talking about anything, let alone what they want the relationship to look like?
I mean, that's the million-dollar question. That's why both you and I write a lot and talk to a lot of people about these issues because it is kind of the perennial question. So I do just want to acknowledge that this is a human condition. This is a human problem. So if you are in someone watching this is in a relationship and feeling like this is really hard. Yeah, it is. It is really hard. It is, and it's not you, and it's maybe not even the other person. It might be your history, your dynamics, your trauma patterns, your attachment. It's all those things. But I do believe, and I'm deeply committed to work that acknowledges that relationships are vehicles for growth. they also are containers for healing and learning. So if you are in a relationship that is stagnant and stuck and frustrating, and like you were saying, Amy, you're feeling yourself getting smaller and smaller, that is probably not where you want to stay, right? Because it requires you to self-abandon. So when you recognize that there's something that you would like to change, that needs to be different for you to have space to grow and learn and evolve together, there can be a tendency to hyper-focus. Particularly if you have a bit more of an anxious attachment style, that hyperfixation on the one thing, this needs to be different, right? There also can be self-rejection or self-denial about what isn't working, sweeping it under the rug, letting it slide, not addressing it. And everyone who's watching this probably knows neither one of those approaches tends to result in what most of us want, which is a more aligned relationship in which we feel safe, we can be authentic, we can give and receive love. So I think you've pointed to the fact that communication is central. But one thing that I find many people also struggle with is listening to themselves. So sometimes we have this feeling of, oh, I need to tell my partner this thing, or are they going to listen? But do we listen to ourselves first? So when I work with my coaching clients, and they come in and they're unhappy about something, my first step I take is becoming really aware in their bodies of what are the sticking points, the snags, the wounds, the unclosed loops, the moments where something hurts or a need we're missing each other. Because then what we can do is we can accept that. And I want to be really clear. I'm a mindfulness teacher. A lot of people misunderstand what acceptance means. Acceptance is not capitulation, and it doesn't mean you stay there. Acceptance is just awareness. Because if we're rejecting what is actually happening, how can we change it? So acceptance here and now is the only place we can start. And that might be a painful place to stay, but sometimes we rush to try to fix it instead of really sitting with what is going on for me, what is coming up. Because our bodies often know, and then we go to our brain and we start troubleshooting and problem solving and blaming and shaming and telling ourselves stories about how we shouldn't need that. And that is a complex way of distracting ourselves from our truth, from what we know. So what I often recommend with my clients is to gather some data over a week or two. So just like a scientist or a journalist, can you get curious and interested? Can you identify in simple terms, what are the core issues in your relationship that you're bumping against? What do you want more of or less of? So just for example, a client might come to me and say, it's just our relationship is so run of the mill. It's gotten really boring. I just, it's the same conversations, the same arguments, the same chores, it just feels like we're in a rut. Okay, can we convert that into what you want? So I would like us to have more fun together in our relationship, right? So I ride motorcycles. And I learned when I was riding my motorcycle that where you look, the motorcycle will go. So if you ever watch someone riding a motorcycle or even bikes, mountain bikes, where you put your eyes, that is where you're going to steer. It is a fact of physics. And I find this to be true in relationships as well. As someone who is always wanting to grow and learn, I will fixate on that 5% of something that isn't going well or that didn't feel quite right. And I will miss the 95% that's going well. So by changing what we don't like into what we want to steer toward, that is a more productive means of doing that. It doesn't mean the other person is going to like it, but at least we're being honest, right? Another example might be communication breakdowns. I'd like for us to develop some new skills for discussing hard things in a more collaborative way. And then you're coming to the person with an ask instead of a complaint. Now, again, your partner might still receive that with defensiveness, but you have done the inner work of assessing what is coming up for me, what do I not like, what would I like, and then bringing that in an invitational way. So honesty, curiosity, sharing what you envision. And it's also important to note that I'm talking about things to change in the relationship. If you want to de-escalate, if you want to go back down the escalator, or if you want to open a previously monogamous partnership, or you want to significantly change, you want to move out or you want them to move, whatever, it will likely require many conversations and with a lot of kindness and a lot of curiosity rather than a one-time bombshell, one and done conversation. Because relationships are collaborative, they take time, they take focus, and conversations, I believe conversations are never over. It's just one chapter. Maybe we're closing the page on that, but then we can always reopen it and revisit that conversation from a new perspective. So those are some advice. I think it's really important to get clear with really clear with yourself instead of coming from that place of reactivity or making it, shaming and blaming or denying. So really, what is actually going on and how can you bring that to the person in a collaborative and potentially productive way? Maybe they have been thinking similar things.
What I love about that is for my longtime viewers, you'll immediately recognize that this is the pleasure principle in action. You focus on what gives you pleasure and move towards that rather than fixating on what causes pain and avoiding it. But the one thing I want to go back to is you mentioned that if you tell your partner this and your partner becomes defensive, that's going to really shut down that conversation. And I know for a lot of women, that automatic defensiveness is something they're just going to they're going to experience. They know he's not going to take this conversation well. And I was wondering, you've now seen a lot of couples who have chosen to custom create their relationship. And you've also seen couples who have decided that no, actually, it's just better if we fall in line and do the one size fits all model. Which couples tend to most successfully be able to pull this off? Like, what kinds of couples, what traits do they have that help them do this hard work without getting defensive, without shutting down, and having the imagination to create something new?
Well, I don't think anyone is going to be that surprised to hear me say this, but I really think the root of being able to have a successful, healthy, happy, connected relationship is emotion self-regulation. Regardless of if you are monogamous or a swinger or polyamorous or a single person, who is dating or maybe not dating, the name of the game, the key that if I could bottle it and sell it or give it away on the streets, I would, because our ability to stay present with what is coming up for us without passing the poison to someone else in all the myriad ways that we do as human beings is the number one chief indicator when a couple comes into me that I believe that they're on a path where they can move towards something more authentic and happier. And honestly, I'm gonna tell you, this is something I tell my clients. Often the anxious party is like, how can I help my partner regulate better? And the avoidant person is like, how can I get this person to stop being so agitated? And the answer to both people is keep your side of the street clean. If, when your partner is getting activated with defensiveness, with anger, with frustration, and I'm not talking about abuse levels, I'm talking about standard run of the mill, typical relationship friction. That we can talk about another category of level, but day to day, when you're not afraid for your safety, but there's emotional strain, the best gift you can give yourself and your partner is to regulate yourself. And sometimes that means taking space. It means walking away from a conversation. It means taking it to your journal, a therapist, a friend. It means coming back and saying, can we try that again? I noticed you got really defensive. I feel like we had a miscommunication and maybe you're hearing something I didn't say. What did you hear me say? Right? And in a non-challenging way, but saying, can we reflect back what you had a really big reaction to something, and I was actually just asking for us to come together and be able to talk about this. What's coming up for you? I do think that speaking to kind of the couple skills, what I really they have a high tolerance for getting it wrong, for not having the answer, for not already knowing, but being willing to self-reflect and communicate with their partner. Lots of people who I see designing their own relationships are a lot like your audience, right? They want to live meaningful lives. Whether that looks like conscious monogamy, more traditional route, or if it's something, hey, I don't want to be in a cookie cutter house. I want to live with the polycule and have garden table polyamory, and I want to have metamors and comets and, all kinds of, really untraditional. It requires a lot of courage. Living and being in relationships is one of the hardest things that we do as human beings. It is a microcosm of what we find difficult in the world. It is the friction between us and someone who is different than us. And that courage to be different, or to admit that you don't know what you want, but what you're doing now isn't quite fitting, right? And to have those hard conversations. Other traits along with that: self-awareness, communicating with yourself before jumping to, we need to talk about this together. Those emotion regulation skills, and a commitment to radical honesty. Being able to say, I love you, and I want to work on our sex life. I want to try new things. Or I am I'm bisexual, and I have always been with you, and I don't want to leave you, and I'd really love the opportunity to explore what intimacy with someone else might look like. Is there space for that in this relationship? Do you love me in a way that we can negotiate this together? And so it's not easy, but I also think it's the good kind of hard work.
So I have a question about what women can do when they broach these questions with a partner and he immediately says, "What? Am I not enough for you? You aren't happy with me. It feels like you're disappointed in what we have together. Do you even love me?" Because it's wonderful to think about, that we can have these conscious conversations about what we want a relationship to look like, but what we are also implying is that the way the relationship is as it is isn't enough, and that hurts to hear. So what can we say to make sure that our partner knows that the love is never in question, that this is just about the form it takes?
Yeah, I think it's a really valid question, and I do find that sometimes people who are lecturing or teaching or writing in the polyamory space, there can be a bit of that Pollyanna attitude of, well, there's plenty of love to go around, and it's not a critique of you that you want to be with someone else, and I actually do endorse that philosophy. I do think that that is true. But as someone who has lived polyamorously, I can also say that when your partner is interested in someone other than you, it brings up the insecurities that are already there, but it kind of brings them out. Um, there are a couple ways I want to answer this question. One is the rates of sexual indiscretion and affairs are incredibly high. The people who admit to having affairs outside of their marriage, with other people, and not ever confessing it or getting caught at it, that to me is a betrayal, because you have not considered your partner. You have not considered the person and what the implications might be for them and for their heart and for their well-being. So I just want to name an alternative option is non-monogamy that is unethical. And so that is never, and I never endorse that, right? But I do think that the key is the point that you just made, which is leading with love, leading with acceptance, leading with the tremendous things that you do appreciate about the person, that this is not about being miserable and unhappy and wanting to replace them. The other key word that I use a lot is the idea of unlearning, right? So we need to unlearn the relationship escalator. We need to unlearn that if someone wants something different from us, that means they're bad, or or we're wrong for wanting what we want. We're wrong, that we want too much. That there is no such thing as too needy. I don't believe that you are too needy. You're just asking the wrong person if they're telling you you're too needy. So all this to say, when someone brings this up with a partner, the idea of opening the relationship or making significant changes, again, I think it's getting clear. What are you aiming for? And are you inviting that person to collaborate and imagine with you? Saying, what would you like to grow in our relationship? Is there something that maybe, that I'm not fully providing for you? Because it's, if we just come in and we're like, this is what I want to change, and I don't like this and I don't like that, as you said, it's pursuing what is pleasurable, but also inviting the other person along as your co-collaborator, as your co-conspirator. I know personally, when I opened, my husband and I opened our marriage, we had many, many conversations where there was a lot of validation and affirming and love, and it was still hard. And what we did was we took the smallest possible step. So going out together and checking people out, but not going home with anyone else. talking about things that we wanted to try that we hadn't tried, watching a movie and acknowledging, hey, I think that person's really hot. If you had a chance to kiss them, would you? Right? So just starting to soften those really rigid monogamy rules and seeing how did that feel for you? What did that bring up for me? Because jealousy and feelings of insecurity are information about a wound that needs a little more care. It doesn't mean that the person is doing something wrong or that they shouldn't have asked it. But when we have a feeling, it's a messenger. What is the message it is telling you? And so I think having compassion for the things that might come up for your partner is important. It's also important to recognize that if you open this conversation and you ask for different things, your partner might also ask for different things. And that can be destabilizing. It can be unsteadying. And yet, I know many people for whom they say, it's been hard, but I would never go back. This feels truer. This feels realer. And I know that my person is choosing me every day, not by default, but because they could be with someone else, but they're choosing me again and again. And there's a lot of trust that you can build through that complexity and that difficulty that I think can be really beautiful.
So that is perfect. And I want to just make sure that we've covered one more topic that I think is crucial because as you said, your partner's going to bring up, if you bring up, I want this to change, your partner might come back and say, well, I want this to change. And I know for a lot of women, there's going to be pressure to just say yes because
Mhm.
we want our partner to be happy. If our partner says, well, actually, you want us to live in different houses. Well, I want us to open our relationship. And you're like, no, living in different houses is okay. Opening the relationship isn't. And then you think, well, I'm asking him to do this thing for me. Maybe I should consider doing this thing for him. And I should say yes, but every part of my being is saying, no, I don't want this. I'm not ready. Or maybe you just think, or maybe is this just me being conventional? Is this just me thinking we're on the escalator and we need to go up? Maybe I should say yes because I don't want to deny him. So I want to talk about what you do when your guts are saying no, but you feel like you need to say yes. How do you find your truth? How do you negotiate? How do you express it?
I mean, Amy, you asked the best questions. You absolutely asked the best questions. And if I had, if I had the answer that I could just, synopsize and say and, in a pat answer, well, number one, it probably wouldn't be applicable to everyone, first of all. If there's an easy answer, it's often not the complete answer. But I think again, it does come back to self-knowledge, self-awareness, and that deep ability to listen to yourself. And that sometimes means you know, looking at your partner and saying, I can hear that that is really important to you and that is what you want. And I am feeling a really strong no on that right now. I'm willing to entertain it. I would definitely suggest you cannot coerce someone into ethical non-monogamy. So if one partner wants monogamy and the other partner wants something other than monogamy, that can work. There are monogamous polyamorous couples who I know, and in the literature, that tends to be a really hard road for both people. That requires even more communication. But if your answer is no, again, it doesn't mean you're right and he's wrong or vice versa, but it does mean there might not be compatibility to maintain this relationship. And I think we get better and better later, the longer we live, in saying, that is not for me. That's fine. That's fine for you. That is not for me. And so I do think that I think it is really, really important to honor your self-knowing. Um, Another thing is to check out, like a lot of people find an entry point to doing some of these, kind of varsity level relating ways of relating. There's a lot of wonderful resources out there that I have a resource page on my website that I would encourage as a good first kind of first stop for really reading about and unlearning, starting to question those beliefs that we've practiced so many times we don't see them, about what does it mean if my partner is attracted to someone else, or what does it mean if I'm attracted to someone other than my partner, or what if I want something different than my partner wants. So specifically, I always recommend Esther Perel's work, including her amazing podcast, Where Should We Begin, which makes me cry every time I listen to it, because just the vulnerability people share there. Jessica Fern's Polysecure is a really wonderful book that is for polyamorous people, but I also recommend it for my monogamous people because it's really about developing secure attachment with oneself so that then in relationship, we are clearer. What is my yes and what is my no? And then the last one is a really wonderful, thoughtful podcast called Multi-Amory. They also have a book called Multi-Amory Essential Tools for Modern Relationships. And again, it's wonderful advice that applies across the spectrum. But I think if your partner asks for something and it's tit for tat, number one, for me, that's a red flag. If I bring my partner something and he says, well, I've been meaning to tell you, I want this too. I'm like, can we have that as a separate conversation? Because you haven't brought it to me till now. And now suddenly you want it to be even Steven. That's not, I don't think that that's necessarily going to be of benefit for either of you. So I would say, can we table that and discuss this and kind of keep them as their own unique conversation? And then the other, again, is reading up, talking to people who are doing it differently, talking to your therapist if they're polyamorous friendly, if they're well versed in that. I have clients who come to me as a coach rather than a therapist because they say, I was trying to talk to my therapist about something and I was educating them. And I need a peer support in this space. But unlearning is a big step. But again, when your answer is no, or it's not right now, a loving partner will accept that as an answer. And then you can continue the conversation. And if you're being pushed or nudged or coerced or persuaded into something that your body is saying no to, and you're being rushed and hurried along, those are hugely problematic. And I never see a polyamorous relationship work out where one person was dragged kicking and screaming into it. Both people need to see how it might work for them. It may still end, the relationship might not be sustained, but that doesn't mean it's a failure. But you're heading for failure if one person is making coercive demands that the other person is deeply uncomfortable with, without a scaffold and a structure where there's authentic growth together in that direction.
So one thing I'm really seeing here is that somebody who wants to start having these conversations, somebody who wants to have a different kind of relationship, one that really feels good, may come across a wall, and that wall might be their partner not being able to do this work for them. Their partner saying, you know what we've got is good enough. No, I don't have to change it. You wanting to change it means you don't love me. Well, if you want this, then I want that. So what I'm seeing, and you can tell me if I'm right about this, is it true that if a woman wants to bring up the conversation about custom designing the relationship, saying, I want to tweak some things to make it better for me, does she need to be prepared that that conversation can destabilize the relationship and that it could lead to its end?
Yes.
Yeah.
I believe profoundly in committed, intentional relationships. And I really would love to be a part of this movement that is breaking down and replacing the idea that because a relationship ends, it failed. Every relationship is going to end because someone dies or someone leaves. Every relationship you will ever be in, every relationship that has ever occurred on this planet ends at some point. And I think when we bear that in mind, when we hold that as it's not that I did something wrong or I've lost something, maybe we have done something wrong. Maybe we have lost something. Maybe it is a great heartbreak. But you know what? I have a tattoo on my wrist and it says, you are here to risk your heart. And I believe that because if we live small and cowed and fearful, holding on to something that isn't working for us, that is its own kind of loss. We are losing our creativity. We are losing our dynamism. We are losing our energy. You see it when someone leaves a relationship and they suddenly are this fuller, more flourishing version of themselves. That is really good data. That is really good information about what the cost of maintaining that from the outside looked like a successful relationship. Oh, they're still together. They're trying really hard. And I believe in trying hard. I am deeply invested in helping people make their relationships work. And I think you cannot do that without an acknowledgement that sometimes the right call is to let go. And that actually opens up opens up new possibilities and new space. And when we're so afraid of losing something, it means that our yes isn't always really our yes. And we don't say no when we really should say no. And so this is the paradox of relationship is we have to love it, we have to try, we have to be there, we have to show up, and we have to be ready and have the courage to say, I love you and I wanted this to work. And the writing's on the wall and I'm ready to let you go with love. And there are beautiful ways to do that. That I believe deeply in, I believe deeply in divorce. I believe in marriage and I believe in divorce. And so, yes, we do need to be prepared that by asking to remake our patterns and to create something new in a relationship space, it may lead to the end of that relationship.
Yeah.
It's true.
Now, I want to bring up something else you do. You are a registered celebrant now. You help people create ceremonies with conscious uncoupling. And you also, of course, as you've talked about, you work with singles and you work with couples. You do it on Zoom, so you can work with clients anywhere in the world. If somebody listening would like your help, like, I think she could really help me understand what to do here. How can they work with you? What's your coaching process like?
Yeah, so I always am completely upfront. I have a PhD, but it is in rhetoric and writing. So I am not a therapist and I am not a counselor. So my work as a coach is very much more in the space of holding you, creating a container where you or you and your partner can come together and really discover, explore, examine, and I ask good, usefully pushy, but compassionate questions to help my clients find clarity around what changes they might want to make in their lives. So I bring together my mindfulness background with embodiment, and then also attention to the stories that we tell and the words that we use. Along with really practical tools. So when I work with coaching clients, they often leave with very specific, over the next couple of weeks, here are some specific skills that you're going to be working on with this homework. I do meet with clients, in my home office, and I also meet with people around the world. And the best way to reach me, I'm not super active on socials. The best way to reach me is just through my website, www.janelatlas.com.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Janelle, for spending your time here today. I think you've given us so much to think about. And I love some of the language you've given us. Like, I think the idea of a comet, I'd never heard that before. And I'm just going to start using that because it's wonderful. Um, we've talked about so much today, but I wondered, was there anything we didn't get to discuss? Is there any final thoughts you would like to leave our viewers with?
You know, I'm a bit of a cheerleader, and I'm always rooting for everyone who I encounter that they show up, right? That it's not about having all of the answers or having a perfect relationship or trusting that everything is going to be okay, because it might not feel okay. There are stretches where relationships are hard and difficult, or you feel lonely, or you feel like you're not being heard. But I do ultimately believe that when you continue to wake up to what is actually going on and be honest, you take steps and you do end up, you fall into really good things along the way. And so I would just encourage you, if you're feeling a bit, someone watching this is feeling a bit overwhelmed or discouraged or disappointed with where they are, it's never too late to take a small step, a step of trust in a direction that you think might be right for you. And if it's not, you can always step back. Right. But I do believe we're here to risk our hearts. And this is one space in which we can do that.